Hello, my dear students. My name is Ankit Sharma, and I welcome you all to the Prime Skills. This is Unit 5, and this is the part 1 of Unit 5, in which we would be discussing about the dimensions of oral communication. So let's move ahead. So this is the syllabus of Unit 5, code and content, stimulus and response, encoding process, decoding process, pronunciation, syllables, and then we would be talking about professional personality attributes and all. In today's session, we will be talking about code and content, stimulus and response, and encoding process, and finally, the decoding process. So let us discuss about the dimensions of oral communication first of all. What is communication? Communication is simply the act of transferring information from one place, person, or group to another, right? Communication is imparting or exchanging an information by speaking, writing, or using some other medium and the successful conveying and sharing of ideas and feeling. So it means that communication means that simply you are conveying certain sort of ideas or your feelings to some other person or some other group. Every communication involves at least one sender, a message, and a recipient. So there is always a sender and a receiver. A message is first encoded from the side of sender and it is then sent to the receiver. And receiver decodes it in order to understand and get the message completely. This may sound simple, but communication is actually a very complex subject. We have already discussed the basics of all these communication skills in the first unit itself. So this unit 5 is having certain repetition of the topics from the unit 1 itself. So in that case, I would definitely be suggesting you to just go to the unit 1 in order to get or understand the basic structure of the communication. The transmission of the message from sender to recipient can be affected by a huge range of things. These include our emotions, the cultural situation, the medium used to communicate, and even our location. Our emotions can definitely impact our communication. Why? Because if you are angry, your communication is entirely different. If you are very happy, your communication is at entirely different level. In the same way, the cultural situation. Now, suppose you are from North India and you are going to South India, in that condition, your communication will vary. In the same way, you are talking about medium. For example, if you are talking over phone or if you are talking face to face, the communication will be different in both the scenarios. And once again, location also. So if you are talking at your home, you will be a little bit more informal. But when you are talking in your office, you will be formal. So that will be a difference of location. A communication, therefore, has three parts: the sender, the message, and the recipient. The sender encodes the message, usually in a mixture of words, non-verbal communication. It is transmitted in some way, for example, in speech or writing, and the recipient decodes it. So the sender actually encodes the message, and encoding here means that converting in a language or converting in a specific way so that it can be understood by the recipient. Now, encoding will always be taking place keeping the audience into consideration. So if your audience understand Hindi language, then probably you would not be encoding your message in English language because it will not be received well with your by your recipients, right? So encoding will always be having an objective or goal as audience in mind. So please keep that in mind. Of course, there may be more than one recipient, and the complexity of communication means that each one may receive a slightly different message. So, if you are a single communicator, if you are speaking on podium and there are hundreds of people who are listening to you, you cannot control that what other or what those people perceive out of your communication. Although you can control it up to a certain limit by making it very clear, by making your message very clear, but once again, there are certain biases which are with audience. So, the audience can get different message. Every single person up there in your audience can actually get a different message. So that's why it becomes a complicated procedure. Two people may read very different things into the choice of words and or body language. It is also possible that neither of them will have quite the same understanding as a sender. It may also be possible that you are actually going to deliver information, but that information is not being understood even by a single audience. So that may result because of differing background, or it may be just because of some barriers which are in communication. In face-to-face communication, the roles of the sender and recipient are not distinct. The two roles will pass back and forward between two people talking. Both parties communicate with each other even if in very subtle ways such as thorough eye contact or lack of and general body language. What does it mean? It means that whenever two people are talking face to face in that situation, at one time one person can act like a sender, another can act like a receiver. On the other hand, the one who was just acting like a receiver can act like a sender, and the one who was acting as a sender can act like a receiver. So it can the role can like pass on to each other alternatively. In written communication, however, the sender and recipient are more distinct. So, for example, if somebody has written a book and you are reading a book, then the writer or the author is basically the sender and you are a receiver, but you cannot change your place now. So, you can't be the author at any moment and the author cannot be a speaker. So, in written communication, it is very much clear that who is the sender and who is the receiver. Categories of communication. There are a wide range of ways in which we communicate, and more than one way may be occurring at a given time. The different categories of communication include number one, spoken or verbal communication, which includes face-to-face, telephonic, or radio, or television, or other media. So, spoken means when you are uttering some words or when you are using some words. Okay, so spoken can be different type of communication, but communication can be spoken or written both. Whenever you are using some words, that could be verbal communication. Now comes the non-verbal communication, which includes covering body language, gestures, how we dress and act, how we stand. Even our scent can be the part of our non-verbal communication. So if you like don't smell good, or if you stink, nobody would like to communicate or talk to you. So that is also a non-verbal communication. Some people don't care about the personal hygiene, and that becomes the obstacle and barrier in the communication. There are many subtle ways that we communicate, perhaps even unintentionally, with others. For example, the tone of voice can give us clues to mood or emotional state, whilst hand signals or gestures can add to a spoken message. So now when you are speaking in a rude voice, you are simply distracting people. You are simply just, deviating people away from you. You are not attracting them. So if you really want to become a good communicator, your tone of voice should be appealing one. Your tone of voice should be very much soothing so that everybody would come to you to talk about something. Okay. If your tone of voice is very rude or like very harsh, nobody would like to talk to you. In the same way, if you keep on talking in a very aggressive way, or like in some other different or negative type of, or you can say like a negative shade of emotional state, nobody would like to speak to you or communicate to you. Written communication. So the third form is written communication, which includes letters, emails, social media, books, magazines, internet, and other media. Until recent times, a relatively small number of writers and publishers were very powerful when it came to communicating the written word. Today, we can all write and publish our ideas online, which has led to an explosion of information and communication possibilities. If you talk about just few years back, or maybe like 5 to 10 years back, you could find that there were only few people who could write the books, and there was no other mean to write down anything. But nowadays, if you just go online, you can write on Twitter, you can write on Facebook, you can write on all other types of different types of social media, you can write on blogs, and you can share them. So it means everybody has got a power to write. So if you have got a capability to write effectively, you can change the world literally. Okay. And then comes finally the visualization. So graphs and charts, map, logos, and various other types of visualization messages can communicate your message very, very effectively. What is communication process? So now coming to the communication process, once again, if you really want to get an in-depth understanding of communication process, I would recommend you to go to unit 1, where you can easily find the process of communication in a very, very detailed way. So here we are just touching it. We are simply just having a brief introduction, or you can say the brief touch-up of this communication process. A message or communication is sent by the sender through a communication channel to a receiver or to multiple receivers. The sender must encode the message, the information being conveyed, into a form that is appropriate to the communication channel, and the receivers then decodes the message to understand its meaning and significance. So it is just like a sender is at one end, he's encoding the message, or he's wrapping the message in a perfect way, in a perfect fashion, so that it can be understood by the audience. Then it channelizes the message through the path, and this message goes to the sender, or sorry, goes to the receiver. The receiver decodes it, or just like brings it out of the envelope of the encoding, and simply try to grasp it. And then finally goes a feedback process which goes from the receiver to sender. So the if feedback is equivalent to the message which sender was about to communicate, or which sender was having an intention to communicate, if they both are equivalent, or you can say both are equal, then probably we can say that the communication was effective. But if there is any difference in the message delivered and the feedback given by the receiver to sender, then probably the message was not communicated effectively. Misunderstanding can occur at any stage of communication process if the effective communication is not taking place. Effective communication involves minimizing potential misunderstanding and overcoming any barriers to communication at each stage in the communication process. Now, what are barriers to communication? Once again, I would recommend you to just please visit unit number 1. In playlist you can find the videos, and you can easily understand there's a different very you can say expanded or very elaborative view on the barriers to communication, and it is very important for the examination also. An effective communicator understands their audience, chooses an appropriate communication channel, hones their messages to this channel, and encodes the message to reduce misunderstanding by the receiver. So, effective communicator basically works upon the effectiveness of communication. So, understanding of message, the way message is being delivered, and how exactly to save the channel from barriers and all. They will also seek out the feedback from the receiver as to how the message is understood and attempt to correct any misunderstanding or confusion as soon as possible. So now if you are communicating a message and that message is not being delivered the way you want it to be delivered, probably it is failing. So in order to understand whether your message has been taken properly or not, you need to take the feedback. And if the feedback is very much okay, it means your communication was delivered properly. Receivers can use techniques such as clarification and reflection as effective ways to ensure that the message has been sent or understood correctly. So now clarification and reflection means you can simply ask certain number of questions. It generally happens whenever your faculty is communicating to you, they generally ask certain questions to clarify whether you have really got it or not, right? So your examination is also one type of feedback process. So if you are just like getting good marks in your examination, then probably you have understood what your teacher wanted to say. Encoding and decoding process in communication. Once again, encoding and decoding processes have already been clarified in Unit 1 in great detail. So if you really want to understand properly, please go through them also. Encoding message. All messages must be encoded in a form that can be conveyed by the communication channel chosen for the message. So whatever communication channel you choose, suppose you want to communicate over telephone, you want to communicate over email, you want to communicate over video chatting, whatever channel you are choosing, you need to understand that your encoding should be according to that only. We all do this every day when transferring abstract thoughts into spoken words or in a written form. Everyday conversation is the best part to understand the encoding. Effective communicators encode their message so that they fit both the channel and the intended audience. So now, it doesn't mean that if you are communicating through some complicated medium or complicated media of exchange, you should not care about your audience. Ultimately, your audience are your first priority. Try to understand that if you are delivering a message, if your message is not being delivered in a perfect way to your audience, your entire process of communication will fail. If your audience doesn't understand anything, it means that you are failing. So please try to make sure that your audience should always remain your first priority. They use appropriate language, conveying the information simply and clearly. They also anticipate and eliminate likely causes of confusion and misunderstanding. So the language should be chosen according to the comfortability of your audience. The information should be very clear and very simple, and also try to understand and also try to pre-eliminate or pre-anticipate early that what can be the causes of confusion and misunderstanding, and try to remove them before even communicating. They are generally aware of the recipient's experience in decoding similar communications. So it happens like whenever you are communicating, always try to assume yourself at place of audience and try to understand what type of complications or what type of problems you can face. Successful encoding of message for an audience and the channel is a vital skill in effective communication. So encoding is very, very important. If your encoding is not proper, the message would never be able to cross through the channel, or it would never be able to make an impact which you really want to make through communication. Coming to the decoding process. Once received, the recipient needs to decode the message. Successful decoding is also a vital communication skill. Now, you may be very much good communicator, but a person who is standing in front of you might not be able to understand you properly because of certain sort of incompetencies. So recipients need to decode the message properly, and if he's unable to decode the message, once again this would be a failure of your communication. Although you don't have any mistake in that, but once again the communication would be falling on the deaf ears. People will decode and understand messages in different way. Every person has got a different background, right? So on the basis of background, those people will be decoding your message. So at times you are saying some single statement, you can say one statement to everybody, but that statement would be having different impact on every single person based upon their context, based upon their emotions, based upon their geographical location, based upon their biases, and so many other factors. This will depend upon their experience and understanding of the context of the message, how well they know the sender, their psychological state, and how they feel, and the time and place of receipt. Okay, so it will all depend upon various communication factors or various environmental factors. They may also be affected by any barriers to communication which might be present, and that's why barriers should always be removed. Although they cannot be removed completely, but they should be minimized as much as possible. There are, therefore, a wide range of factors that will affect decoding and understanding. Yes, of course, there are numerous number of factors which we need to take care of. Successful communicators understand how the message will be decoded and anticipate and remove as many as possible of the potential sources of misunderstanding. Being a successful communicator means that you need to minimize the sources of misunderstanding or confusion as much as possible, because if there are certain sources of miscommunication, your communication would not be as effective as you really want it to be. Code and content in communication skills. This is another topic. Any human communication system involves the production of message by someone and the receipt of that message by someone else. To encode a message, one must possess necessary encoding skills. Now, encoding means just converting your message in certain codes which is understood by or which is understandable by your audience. Code. Languages are codes. So now try to understand whenever you want to encode, what is the meaning of encoding? Encoding means that converting your message into a language or into a code which is understandable by your audience. So for example, if you are a Hindi speaking person and you want to communicate your message to all those people who can understand only English, you will have to convert your message into a code which is English, right? So your translation from Hindi to English or your conversion of message from Hindi to English will be considered to be a encoding process. And that, like, you are doing encoding. Why is this called an encoding process? Because you are actually converting your message into such a code which is understandable by your audience. A code may be defined as any group of symbols that can be structured in a way that is meaningful to another person. So whatever message you are conveying, it should be meaningful to another person. And how can you make it sure? You can make it sure by converting it into a code which is understandable by your audience. English language, like any other language, is a code. It contains elements that are arranged in a meaningful order. A code has a group of elements, vocabulary, and a set of procedures for combining these elements meaningfully, which is also known as syntax. Syntax is grammar. They're like almost similar, although there's a huge difference in them. But once again, like for us, they are considered to be similar. So in order to convert into a code, you need two things, your vocabulary and the grammar. Only then you would be able to communicate effectively. Now, what is content? The content is the message that is selected by the source to express its purpose. So if you really want to convey your message properly, then code and content both are very important. If content is not effective, like even code will not be able to help you. But if your content is effective and your code is not proper, in that situation, despite having a strong and a beautiful content, you would not be able to communicate effectively. Content, like codes, has both elements and a structure. When more than one piece of information is to be presented, they should have some order or structure. An individual may sometimes be identified by his characteristic way of structuring message. This is because the individual communicates in a way that is distinctive to him. He uses a distinctive way or method which can become his habit by constant use. Now try to understand one very important thing here. Sometimes some people speak in such a very different way that they are simply identified by their way only. For example, if you talk about Prime Minister, our ex-Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, he used to speak in such a way that he was identified by his speaking style. In the same way, if you talk about our ex-Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, he used to speak in such a way that was very much distinct to him. If you talk about our current Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he speaks in such a way that is considered to be very impactful and very distinguished to him only. So every person has got a different way of communication. If you develop your own style, you become a communicator who is recognized by his own style. Now comes two important terms, which are code switching and code mixing. Now suppose like you are a native speaker, you are a Hindi native speaker, and then you learn English as a second language, then these two terms become very much relevant to you. Okay, so try to understand. Code switching and code mixing are typically processes for those who speak more than one language or more than one dialect. Dialect are basically the two forms of a similar language. So they are, for example, like Bhojpuri and you can say Maithili. These two are the different dialects of Hindi language or something like that. They are powerful strategies that require multilinguistic skills and are not indicative of language impairment. Some people think that if you are using Hindi, if you are speaking in English, and if you start using certain words of Hindi in English, some people think that you don't have a very good communication skill, but it is not so. According to psychologists and according to linguists, this is called code mixing or code switching. And whenever you have a capability of code mixing or code switching, it means that you have got knowledge, or you can say expansive knowledge of both the languages. So you don't need to worry about it. It happens in every two languages. Any person who is having very different native language and using some other language as a second language, so he should be very much comfortable in utilizing at certain places the code switching and code mixing. Now, what are them? We are just going to understand them very easily. Often, speakers who use two languages together are described as confused, or they don't know either language well. That is simply isn't the case. So anytime whenever you listen somebody speaking in English and utilizing certain words in Hindi, don't simply jump to the decision or judgment that the person is having really less knowledge of English or less knowledge of second language. It may be possible that in order to make language more enriched, he is actually utilizing both the languages as code mixing and code switching. So let us talk about the code switching. Alternating between two or more languages or language varieties, dialects in context to a single conversation is called code switching. So if you are jumping from one language to another language alternatively, in order to make it more comprehensive, in order to make it more clear, then you are using code switching. Using elements of more than one language when conversing in a manner that is consistent with the syntax, morphology, phonology of each language or dialect. Code switching is simply a juxtaposition within a same conversation of a speech belonging to two different grammatical systems or subsystems. So if you are in one conversation, you're talking to your friend, you're talking in English, but suddenly you jump to make one sentence in Hindi and then again all sentences in English, that is called your code switching. So example of code switching can be, I was going to a movie yesterday and रास्ते में मुझे सुधा मिल गई. So now what happens, like you hear one sentence is in Hindi, another sentence is in English. It may be that after this one sentence will be again in English and then again in Hindi. So this is called code switching. So you are making one complete sentence in English and then one complete sentence in Hindi. That is called code switching. Okay. Now coming to code mixing. Code mixing refers to the embedding of linguistic units such as phrases, words and morphemes of one language into an utterance of another language. Code switching was something like when you were speaking one complete sentence of one language and then complete sentence of another language. In code mixing, you won't complete the sentence. You will be simply putting, or you can say using certain words or phrases of different language. Okay, for example, मैं कल मूवी देखने जा रहा था और जा रही थी and रास्ते में I met Sudha. So here you are using Hindi as a complete language, but I met Sudha is an English phrase. So here what you are doing, you are simply using a code mixing. Not code switching, because the complete sentence is not in English. It was just a phrase, I met Sudha. All right. So in this way, you can get an idea of code mixing and code switching. Simply, code mixing is mixing of two or more languages while communicating. It is often common to a speaker who knows two or more languages to take one word or more than one word from one language and introduce it while speaking another language. So it is very common. You don't need to worry about it. So it may be possible somebody can ask you the difference between code switching and code mixing. So here's the difference. In a single conversation, if a language speaker who is speaking, for example, English, switches to French and again to English, maybe it will be code switching, right? One sentence in English, then another sentence in French, and then coming back to English. Here, the speaker is not mixing just a few words of one language in between the other language. He's speaking one language and then switching to another language. One sentence spoken in one language and second in another language. That is called what? Code switching. Now, code switching is usually inter-sentences, while code mixing is an intra-sentential phenomenon. Intra-sentence means in one sentence you are using two languages, then it is called code mixing. If you are using in your entire communication, you are using one sentence from one language and another sentence from another language, that is called your code switching. Okay, I hope the difference is clear here. Linguists refer to the use of two or more languages concurrently in a conversation as code switching. Code switching is considered to be the distinctive form other linguistic practices, including language transfer and the language borrowing, right? So these two are the different other type of linguistic practices which are not relevant to us right now. In addition to the use of language, code switching also involves switching between the dialects, the style of speech, gestures, body language, vocal registers, etc. So you can actually, if you are just switching the dialects, if you are switching the styles of speeches, if you are switching the gestures, the body language, the vocal registers also, even then it is considered to be the code switching. Stimulus and response in communication skills. Stimulus and response are two terms that are frequently used in any discussion on the communication process. Now, a stimulus is anything that a person can receive through one of his senses. In fact, it is anything that can reproduce or produce a sensation. So anything which you are getting out of environment, which you are getting out of people during a communication, that is called a stimulus. So suppose like somebody is winking eye at you, that is a stimulus. Somebody is waving hi at you, that is a stimulus. Somebody is simply like asking you to shake hand, or simply just forwarding his hand for shaking hand, that is called a gesture or a stimulus once again. Because stimulus is something which provokes or which actually asks for an action or response in return. And what is a response? And a response is anything that an individual does as a reaction to the stimulus. So whenever you're getting a stimulus, you will definitely be doing certain sort of reaction, and that reaction will be known as your response. These two terms, stimulus and response, are ultimately connected with the whole learning process. The communication objective of the source is to bring about a change in the behavior of the receiver, right? So stimulus is something which asks for an action or a reaction, or basically a response, and response is basically the reaction or result of a stimulus. So that was all from my side for this first video, my dear students. I'm just going to post the next video today itself, and after that your entire course will be completed of this technical communication. So as your examination is approaching on 24th, all the very best for your examination. Please do really well. Having any question to ask, I would definitely be available to all of you as and when you are simply messaging me. Okay, so please try to reach me out on Telegram or WhatsApp, or simply call me if you really like to ask a question directly. Also, I would be sharing certain questions to you which would be very important for your examination point of view. So please go through them also. They will definitely help you out. Thank you so much, guys. Any doubt, please ask me again. See you in the next video.